My mom's unhealed trauma is now my burden. I don't want him to be mad at me, she cried, unable to cope without my dad. After years of mediating their issues, I'm exhausted from her breakdowns in public. Will she ever get help or am I stuck forever? My mother, 70 years old, and I, 43 years old, have maintained a close relationship throughout my life. She created a magical and comforting home during my childhood, and for a significant portion of my teenage years and 20s, she felt like my best friend. Although we experienced a few difficult periods, we managed to overcome them, and I always felt that we remained supportive of one another. As I matured, my mother began to share some of the traumatic experiences she had endured throughout her life. She typically revealed these stories following episodes of anxiety related to recent events in her surroundings that reminded her of those traumas. I have always listened attentively and tried to offer my condolences, comfort, and perspective because I love her and genuinely want to help her whenever I can. I have also faced my own share of trauma, and I have engaged in substantial inner work, therapy, self-directed education, and mental restructuring to emerge stronger than I have ever been. It has been a considerable effort taking years, and while I am still not fully healed, I have progressed far beyond what I once thought possible. I undertook this journey not only for myself but also for my two children, as I never wanted to inadvertently pass my own traumas down to them. I bring this up because through the work I have done and the trauma and abuse education I have pursued, I have come to realize that my mother desperately needs therapy and that she remains far from healed. Over the last few years, it seems to have become increasingly common for her to break down and cry at least once during most of our visits, regardless of our location or who is present, as something often triggers memories of a past trauma. This has occurred in restaurants, at her home during family gatherings, and at my house when she comes over to spend time with my husband and me. One of the first occasions when my parents and my current husband were together as my husband and I had been in a long-distance relationship for a period was at my youngest daughter's 11th birthday celebration at our home. As my parents exited the car, I could immediately sense that my mother was upset. Sure enough, she began to cry in the driveway almost before greeting my husband, as my father had said or done something she took poorly, which impacted her so deeply that she spent the entire party giving him the cold shoulder and responding briefly whenever he attempted to speak with her. I received accounts of the incident from both her and my father separately, detailing their individual perspectives, and I felt compelled to mediate or at least encourage each of them to understand the other's viewpoint and highlight where one may have been in the wrong. This type of situation occurred frequently, as I will elaborate on later in this post. A few years ago, my mother accompanied me on a trip from the Midwest to the East Coast to pick up my daughters from their father's house, where they stayed during the summer. During the drive, my mother took over the driving while I rested, intending to resume driving later. I was jolted awake by a sudden impact, realizing my mother had fallen asleep at the wheel and collided with the guardrail on the opposite side of the road. Fortunately, no oncoming vehicles were present, and neither my mother nor I sustained serious injuries. After confirming my mother was unharmed, I immediately called 911, but she instantly fell into a panic attack. I contacted my father, my ex-husband, and my current husband to inform them of the situation while also communicating with paramedics and police officers, as my mother was hyperventilating, near fainting, and crying, rendering her unable to speak. There was a significant gouge along the side of the car, which my parents' insurance covered, but the vehicle remained drivable. After we were both checked over and the police had taken our information, I drove us the rest of the way. We were only a couple of hours from my children, so we arrived shortly after the accident, and I spent that time reassuring my mother that it was merely an accident and that we were both okay with no real harm done. She adamantly refused to accept this, repeatedly blaming herself. Although she eventually appeared to calm down, I knew she was not truly okay. After picking up the girls, we found a nearby hotel for a restful night. The children were excited to see their Mimi and me and to be in a new hotel. We ordered food, although my mother did not eat and attempted to relax, but my mother soon panicked again, leading her to vomit in the bathroom and faint, prompting me to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital for intravenous hydration. My daughters witnessed this, and since this was an unprecedented situation for us, they accompanied me while I followed the ambulance to the hospital without knowing which hospital they were taking her to. Fortunately, my mother received a couple of bags of IV fluids that improved her condition, and afterward, we returned to the hotel to sleep before heading home the next day. About a year ago, I invited my mother to lunch since we rarely get to do such things together and I missed her. She agreed and we were both excited. My husband and my father also arranged to do something together to bond and get to know one another better. The restaurant was delightful, and we were engaged in great conversation when suddenly something we discussed must have triggered her post-traumatic stress disorder, leading her to tear up with a shaky voice. She began discussing one of her past traumas, becoming so overwhelmed that I genuinely thought she might scream or have a panic attack right at the table. I believe she nearly did, Instead, she cried profusely while speaking about the trauma somewhat loudly. I mentioned this as I was aware that we were in public and that nearby patrons appeared concerned. I managed to console her and help her regain her composure, but afterward, the atmosphere of the lunch shifted to a more subdued tone, and I just wanted to go home. Around Christmas, my mother requested to speak with my husband and me and immediately became upset, starting to cry. She wanted to give us Christmas money so we could spend it as we wished but felt immense guilt, fearing that we would think she did not care since she was offering money instead of gifts. We assured her that we loved her and that money was genuinely more helpful than material gifts, as we only needed to pay bills. She expressed that she understood that, yet feared we might interpret her gesture as lacking love or care due to the absence of tangible items. This insecurity stemmed from her trauma. It took nearly 30 minutes of reassurance from my father, my husband, and me before she ceased crying. Again, I was glad to comfort her, but I felt exhausted afterward. Many other similar incidents have occurred, but I believe these examples sufficiently illustrate my experiences from recent years, and realistically since I was a teenager when my mother began to share her traumas with me. Although this pattern has persisted for a long time, I have only recently begun to recognize it more clearly, particularly because it has been happening in front of my children and others in public, rather than just in private with me. My father has been a significant source of my mother's anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, as he is responsible for much of her trauma. My parents began their relationship at age 18, and my father displayed immaturity and a lack of understanding concerning how to be a good husband and father. His mother, my grandmother, was a narcissist who raised him similarly, resulting in my mother enduring various forms of mental, emotional, and financial abuse from him for over 51 years. My father, unaware of the damage he had inflicted, believed he was justified in his behavior, confident in his correctness about everything. He was very controlling regarding finances, often making my mother feel guilty and wrong for spending money on anything he deemed unnecessary. This will connect to the most recent event I will discuss shortly. After my grandmother passed away, dynamics began to change. Being freed from her influence provided my mother, who was not favored by my father's mother, and my father the opportunity to connect in ways they never had before. After many intense and meaningful conversations with my mother and me over a period of years, my father finally began to realize the detrimental impact of his actions on my mother. It was as though the fog of his entitlement and superiority started to lift, allowing him to comprehend the multitude of ways he had caused her pain and anxiety. I witnessed him genuinely attempt to change his behavior, but I knew that altering deeply ingrained habits and beliefs requires gradual deconstruction and rebuilding. It is not a matter of simply switching on improvement. However, he did strive to evolve. While he engaged in harmful practices throughout his marriage to my mother, there was another side to him that I loved dearly. I have truly never encountered another person like him, and I doubt I ever will. I have begun to recognize that my relationships with my mother and father have been different from those of nearly everyone else I know. We have the ability to discuss anything and are honest with one another. No topic has ever been taboo. I have always valued this openness, although it has led to situations where my mother vents about my father, prompting me to help her understand his actions and how to respond. Conversely, my father updates me about my mother, and I find myself in a similar position. Both appear utterly perplexed by their respective situations, struggling to navigate them while interpreting events in ways that often differ from one another's intentions. Initially, I enjoyed acting as a mediator because I believed I was offering assistance. They were unaware of concepts like gaslighting, manipulation, and narcissism until I began discussing them after my divorce from my first husband, who exhibited those behaviors for nearly 11 years. I was eager to enlighten them both. I had always admired my parents' relationship as they were among the few couples I knew who had stayed together without divorcing. However, once I learned about the tribulations they endured both individually and collectively, the illusion of their perfect relationship shattered. Nonetheless, I felt compelled to assist them in strengthening their bond and becoming more united, loving, and understanding. While I never fully grasped whether I succeeded, it felt at least somewhat beneficial. A couple of years ago, my father received a diagnosis of lung cancer. The doctors identified a spot on one lung that required immediate surgery to prevent it from spreading. It was terrifying for me, as I had never lost anyone close before, and the thought of losing my father felt unbearable. After the surgery, they successfully removed the cancer, and we were all relieved. That experience seemed to bring my parents closer together. Then, about a year ago, my father called to inform me that his cancer had returned aggressively. The medical team recommended further chemotherapy and radiation to try and achieve remission, although they were uncertain of the prognosis, given the rapid spread of this particular cancer. They had caught it early, so there was a general sense of optimism regarding their ability to manage it. My father underwent chemotherapy and radiation for several months, but continued experiencing complications with his breathing and blood cell count, resulting in multiple hospital visits as doctors sought to determine the cause. Then, in January of this year, he called to deliver the devastating news that the treatments had failed. The doctor estimated that he might have approximately 6 months to live without chemotherapy or possibly 1 year with it. I was devastated. I had believed he was cured, thinking that we had merely faced a scare and that the worst was behind us, allowing him to enjoy another 10 or perhaps even 20 years. He decided against continuing chemotherapy as he did not want to spend his remaining days feeling sick and exhausted. We all had to respect and support his decision, acknowledging that it was his life and he deserved the autonomy to make that choice. Following this decision, my father's health deteriorated rapidly. My mother was heartbroken but resolved not to spend the remaining days with him exclusively mired in sadness. They opted to simply be together. For about a month, they were able to enjoy outings to restaurants or stroll through antique shops before he became too weak and fatigued for such activities. At that point, they remained home to converse, watch television, and prepare for what was to come. My father passed away in early March. We were all heartbroken, but no one more than my mother. Having spent 51 years together and 48 years married, she had never experienced being alone. Understandably, her grief was profound, though she also felt a sense of relief that he was no longer suffering and that it was all finally over. The moment she had dreaded since my father's diagnosis had tragically come to fruition. She no longer had to witness him deteriorating, struggling to breathe, or having difficulty eating. It was concluded. A part of her grieving process involved removing as many of my father's belongings from her house as possible, as seeing them daily was overwhelmingly painful, a constant reminder that he would never return. I visited her several times to help her sort through items or simply to keep her company. During this period, she often cried, a reasonable response to losing her life partner. However, sometimes her tears didn't stem solely from his absence. For instance, she expressed a desire to purchase a new couch, one that he had spent his final months lying on, yet could not bear the thought of sitting on it again without him. She experienced similar anxiety about wanting a new desk for her office, as the current one was small and cluttered. I consistently reassured her that my father was no longer concerned about such earthly matters, especially money, insisting that he would only desire her happiness and well-being, along with the things she wanted and needed. I fully acknowledged that simply saying these words may not effectively comfort her, but I felt it was essential to communicate, as she does not deserve to live the remainder of her life panicking each time she wants to spend her money on something. While she ostensibly understood my reasoning to some degree, she mentioned that after so many years living with my father's commentary on her purchasing decisions and constant worry over finances, she could not shake that feeling. I explained that I completely understood, as my ex-husband was also financially controlling, and that with time, that feeling would diminish as she recognized that spending money had no adverse reactions or consequences from anyone. Fast forward to a few days ago, my oldest daughter, 15 years old, called my mother to request a sleepover at her house. Since my father's death, my mother had understandably not felt up to such activities and the children missed her. She agreed, expressing happiness for the distraction now that she was alone and struggling with sleep at night. My mother offered to treat us to dinner before the girls went over for the night, which we accepted. After picking up my husband from work, we headed to the city where my mother lives to meet her at the restaurant. It was a chain with 2 locations in the city. I believed I had arrived at the correct one, but upon not seeing her car, I called her to confirm. From her tone, I could tell she was in a poor mood and my heart sank. It turned out I was at the wrong location. I apologized and said I would head to the right one, which was about 10 minutes away. Upon our arrival, as my mother stepped out of the car, the girls embraced her, and I noticed her eyes were glistening with tears. I approached her, gave her a hug, and quietly assured her that if the sleepover wasn't a good idea, it was wholly okay and we could reschedule. She replied that she was thrilled to have them over, feeling it would provide her with a distraction, so she desired to proceed with the sleepover. I agreed, and we all entered the restaurant. While standing in line and examining the menu, my mother began to cry. I turned to her as she expressed that seeing the items my father used to order made her sad. I understood her feelings and reassured her. Once we sat down with our food, we enjoyed meaningful conversations and the atmosphere seemed to improve. My mother planned to take the children to the grocery store for snacks. She had prepared one of the rooms in her house for them to watch a horror movie together, and the following day she intended to take them to the movies. It sounded as though they would have a wonderful time. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, my mother exclaimed, "Oh my God, I almost forgot to tell you I had a hallucination the other day." Clearly intrigued and a bit concerned, we asked her to elaborate. She instructed the girls to head to her car, which was unlocked, so she could speak with us briefly. The girls went to the parking lot, settled in her car, and my husband and I paused in the restaurant's entryway to hear about her experience. She narrated that she entered the kitchen to fill a glass with water, raised it to her lips to drink, and felt something on her arm. When she glanced down, she saw ants crawling all over and inside the glass and up her arm. She quickly threw the glass into the sink and turned the water back on, but when she looked again, there were no ants. Unsure how to react, I remained silent for a moment. Fortunately, my husband chimed in, sharing his experience with severe insomnia, which sometimes led to hallucinations. My mother nodded, remarking on the strangeness of it all as she had never encountered anything like that. However, she became increasingly upset, expressing her uncertainty about how to navigate life without my father to guide her. I told her she did not need him for that, as she was fully capable of making her own decisions. She questioned why my father had appeared in a dream to my youngest daughter but had not visited her to reassure her that she was making the right choices. As a side note, a few weeks prior, my youngest daughter had a dream in which her pawpaw came to her, allowing her to hug him one last time. She described him as looking the way he did before he fell ill, which I shared with my mother since they shared a special connection. I suggested that perhaps my father's absence from her dreams was intentional, indicating that this was her opportunity to make her own choices and live her own life without his influence. She cried more, her eyes wide with worry, exclaiming, "But I do not want him to be mad at me." I reassured her that he would not be angry. It was a different reality now, he was not here and she could make her own choices without fearing judgment. She responded, "But how do I know that? I do not want to do anything that might upset him." I told her that living that way was unhealthy, as she realistically had no choice but to make her own decisions now. She replied, "Yes, but when he was here, I always relied on him to tell me if I was making the right decisions." I countered that it was unhealthy then as well. At this point, she seemed to become frustrated and exited the restaurant, heading toward her car. I understand that she is grieving deeply. I am also aware of how post-traumatic stress disorder operates, as I experience it too, though not nearly to the extent she currently does. However, while we stood there in circles, patrons were entering the restaurant, and the entryway was small enough to require us to step aside for others to proceed. At the same time, the children awaited her in the parking lot. Eventually, I walked to my car with my husband, feeling uncertain about what to say or do. I worried that perhaps I shouldn't have reassured my mother in that manner, and I questioned whether I had said the wrong thing. However, I struggled to find the right words, wanting only to help her see the truth. The next day, after my mother dropped the children off at our house, she did not come in and had left by the time I heard them enter. I sent her a message expressing gratitude for hosting the girls overnight and apologizing for upsetting her during our discussion. I assured her that it was never my intention to hurt her. She saw the message but did not reply, and since then I have not heard from her. I am unsure what to do. I genuinely empathize with my mother, but I find myself utterly exhausted from managing these situations repeatedly. She refuses to seek therapy despite my numerous recommendations. Although she previously attended sessions with a therapist who was genuinely helping her, she ceased those visits when her insurance changed and failed to find a new therapist. Instead, she simply stopped going, expressing reluctance to engage in therapy again, fearing she would not find someone she liked. I have always argued that there are hundreds of therapists available nearby, and even if the initial encounter does not meet her expectations, there will undoubtedly be someone who fits her needs. She only needs to be patient and take that first step, yet she consistently resists. I have felt a surge of anger at times towards her for projecting her trauma onto me, particularly in front of my children. Perhaps this sentiment is unfair, as trauma responses can occur unexpectedly and for various reasons. Nevertheless, the fact that she refuses to take the steps necessary to help herself means that each time I see her in person, there is a risk of her getting upset. This frustrates me immensely. I do not want to shoulder that burden. Maybe this perspective makes me selfish. I am uncertain. What I do know is that I struggle to navigate this situation and am unclear about the path forward. Story 2. Stuck in a toxic relationship with Flower for 4.5 years, I'm drowning in guilt as I finally develop feelings for someone else. I can't let her drag me down with me, but she's my entire world. Can I find the strength to break free before it's too late? I am venting here because I truly feel like I have no one else to discuss this with. I felt like a failure for turning to artificial intelligence chatbots out of desperation, but I desperately wanted to hear from real people. This will be lengthy, but it is concise compared to how much I could elaborate on this situation, and many details are omitted here. I am not seeking advice as I already know what needs to be done, but I lack the emotional strength to take action. For privacy, I will refer to my partner as Flower. I'm a college student who has been in a relationship with my girlfriend Flower for 4.5 years. Like many relationships, ours began positively but gradually worsened. The situation fluctuates. There are times when things feel wonderful and times when they feel dreadful. However, I have long had an underlying sense that something is amiss. After we graduated from high school, she moved into my college apartment with me and promised she would enroll in the community college in town. However, from day one of living together, she would always be by my side. She accompanied me to campus every day, waited outside the classrooms until I finished my classes, and sat with me for hours while I studied independently. She tagged along without asking to every event I attended. I felt as though I was not permitted to have a life outside of her, and she would become upset over minor issues, such as if I had a group project with another woman in the randomly assigned group, although she has significantly improved in this regard and has repeatedly apologized for her past behavior. Obviously, she never ended up enrolling in the community college and has had only intermittent jobs for the past 3 years. Occasionally, she attempts to paint or write a short story but often gives up quickly. On most days, if she is not imitating my activities, she remains in bed on her phone. She has made her life entirely revolve around me despite repeated warnings from both myself and my family. She was raised by an abusive single mother and suffers from considerable childhood trauma. I also have trauma, but not to the same extent. I still love her and genuinely believe she is a selfless and wonderful person, but the trauma completely controls her when it comes to our relationship. This is not meant to excuse her behavior, but I want to clarify that the issues in our relationship are not solely her fault, as I also failed to recognize how this situation was affecting her for a long time. At the end of my first semester in college, I felt I was at my breaking point. After much contemplation, I came home from a shift at my part-time job and told her I wanted to end our relationship. Naturally, she broke down in tears, and I did not anticipate how deeply that would affect me. Like a coward, I backed down and said we could work through it. I had convinced myself to focus only on the positive aspects of our relationship. This marked the first of many times this cycle would repeat. After this first incident, I eventually became disillusioned after a few months and tried to end things again, only for the exact same outcome to occur each time. One moment I was at a low point and reluctantly sought help from friends and family. They supported me and respectfully removed her belongings from my apartment, finally getting her to leave after much delay. I felt devastated but simultaneously relieved, and they spent the weekend with me to lift my spirits. However, that feeling of emptiness continued to grow stronger. Eventually, a day after they departed, I caved in like a complete fool and called her to come back. Following this near breakup, things were quite good for a while, but in hindsight, I believe it merely initiated a second honeymoon phase. To this day, I harbor deep resentment towards myself for making that choice because I could not handle the loneliness. Although they never mentioned it, I have always felt ashamed and know I let my friends down by getting back together with her after they had done so much for me. I am unsure if I will ever forgive myself. I refuse to let myself go through that again. I simply cannot ask them to help me with this situation anymore because I fear I will allow the same thing to occur again. Over the past few months, I have felt that my mental health has been steadily declining. Not only in my relationship, but I have also been facing various life challenges, including issues with my identity, financial stress, and anxiety about the future of the world, although that is easier to dismiss compared to my more personal struggles. Back in my freshman year, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it recently caused me to reevaluate my entire life. Growing up, I never suspected I was neurodivergent at all. I knew I struggled significantly in social situations, but whenever I tried to discuss that with a trusted adult, they would always dismiss my concerns and tell me that I would grow out of it or that I was just shy and needed to step outside my comfort zone. I consistently followed that advice and forced myself into social situations, even when I felt uncomfortable. And while I have definitely improved, it still requires considerable effort and remains uncomfortable. I sought the ADHD evaluation because I realized I was struggling to focus in lectures. Having never studied and received good grades throughout kindergarten through 12th grade, college was the first time I needed to study. At the time, I thought attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was straightforward, merely a disability that made it challenging to focus and resulted in overthinking. Now, it has brought clarity to many of my behaviors throughout my upbringing that I could never explain, but it does not fully account for everything. I suspect that I could potentially have autism spectrum disorder alongside attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but I cannot afford an evaluation, so I will hold off on making that claim until I can consult a professional. This reevaluation of my life has also led me to realize that my parents were far worse parents than I previously believed, and many of their actions likely contributed to the issues I face today. They were not physically abusive, but they were extremely emotionally neglectful and often infantilized me. I failed to recognize this as a child and always thought I should be grateful for my parents, as others had it worse. About a month ago, I experienced a feeling I had not felt in a long time. I realized I was developing romantic feelings for a classmate, and I felt alive again when I spoke with them. I felt guilty and ashamed upon recognizing that I was developing feelings, and I have no intention of pursuing that person or entering another relationship for a long time, but it made it clear to me that I truly need to end my current one. So reluctantly, I sat down with Flower and told her that I was developing feelings and that we needed to stop pretending that everything was okay and finally end our relationship. She accepted the fact that I was developing feelings, But of course, she began to break down and cry once again. I have made some progress in not holding myself accountable for her reaction, but now another issue is preventing me from going through with the breakup. Her mother is financially unstable and currently living in a motel with their pets, supposedly moving into an apartment soon, but I do not know any details about that. If I break up with Flower, she will be forced into this living situation, and I fear that she will essentially be financially doomed for the rest of her life, assuming she does not do something even more drastic to herself without me. Her mother is very controlling and forbids her from things like attending therapy or school and forces her to work at her retail job and pay the bills, which would only worsen her mental health. Flower does not know how to drive or own a car, and we live in a location that is very dependent on automobiles, so she would need to rely on her mother for transportation. She has no one else to turn to besides me and her mother, and I genuinely do not see any effective means for her to heal from this breakup if she returns to her mother. I understand that it is not my fault that she is in this situation, and I know I should not feel financially obligated to support her at this age. But at the same time, it feels incredibly wrong to do this to another person. I would not even wish this on my worst enemy. Nevertheless, I cannot allow myself to be dragged down with her. Currently, this is the main thing preventing me from going through with it. If I knew that she had at least some kind of support system outside of me, I believe I could handle the tears. But just knowing that I am her entire world and taking that away from her makes it impossible for me not to feel for her. For the past 2 weeks, I have felt like I am trapped in a never-ending cycle. We have had some of our most intense arguments ever. I have said things I deeply regret. I wake up and spend most daylight hours on campus, not texting her at all and distracting myself with my schoolwork while also allowing myself to feel sad and process what is happening. I have never felt so free before and have never had this much control over my current life, but eventually the daylight fades and the dreaded night arrives. I keep telling myself that tonight is the night, but you can easily guess what happens when I return home at night. I think she is experiencing a significant form of denial because every time I arrive home, she appears genuinely happy to see me, as if we are not trapped in this cycle. I tell her what needs to occur and then I ask her to devise a plan to move out as soon as possible. However, she starts breaking down and brings up numerous issues, causing me to cave in. I have tried hard to simply say what I need to say and then ignore her. I have attempted to put on headphones and ignore her or pretend she is not there, but it is impossible when we share a small room. I just cannot do it and I feel like a total failure. I have been stuck in this same cycle, and it is my fault that I cannot break free. Our arguments have worsened progressively. A few nights ago, she lashed out at me, expressing how selfish and terrible I am and how awful men are, which was highly uncharacteristic of her. Her words and tone made me break down as they triggered painful memories of past verbal abuse. I was crying and pleading with her to stop, telling her that this was not who she truly is, and after about 20 minutes she finally snapped out of it and apologized, expressing self-hatred for her actions. It has become evident to me that I have been bottling up a great deal of resentment towards her over the years, which is why I often find myself feeling angry and frustrated when she does little things that irritate me, such as asking about my day when I do not feel like discussing it. That night, I do not know if she influenced me or what, but after a while I began doing the same things she was doing and lashed out at her, telling her to pack her belongings and leave or I would call the police. After I said that, she started packing, but I stopped her and apologized for my words. I felt like I had lost control and was disgusted with my behavior, despite my desire to handle the breakup compassionately. I need to stop engaging because every conversation devolves into an argument, and it is always the same outcome. Nothing productive ever results from it. I have begged her to leave me, asking her why she is doing this to me and why she will not depart if I have continually expressed my unhappiness. She always responds with something like she hopes things will improve, that she wants to give it one more month, implying that I am only breaking up with her because of my feelings for my classmate, that I merely want to sleep around, or that I am going through a difficult time and taking it out on her. She always manages to rationalize the situation. Clearly, things were improving prior to this cycle beginning, and I truly wish I still had the desire to be in a relationship because I still love her. However, after witnessing the toll this relationship takes on us, I know that staying will only lead to catastrophic consequences for both of us. We both have histories of being passively suicidal, hers for reasons unrelated to me, and mine for multiple reasons, including this relationship, and my greatest fear is that she will act on those thoughts while living with her mother. Yet, if I continue to stay, I worry that I may also reach my breaking point, although I have never experienced a genuine desire to act on those thoughts. It is incredibly heartbreaking to see her in this broken state. It feels as though her mind cannot accept that her world is falling apart, so she is living in a delusion. Even worse, I cannot help but blame myself, despite knowing that anyone I consult will tell me it is not my fault. I simply cannot regulate my emotions. Although I know what I need to do, I am uncertain about my next steps. Right now, I am on my campus writing this, cherishing the daylight hours while they last. It is likely that the usual pattern will unfold. I will return home at night and give minimal responses to her because I do not even see the point in initiating the breakup anymore since it always ends the same way. I hope by some miracle she magically has a support system outside of me or that I will suddenly regain the desire to be in this relationship. I understand the longer this continues, the more difficult it will become. However, my cowardly self cannot cope with the painful emotions, so I suppose I will have to face the consequences for a choice I made as a teenager. I will undoubtedly need extensive therapy after this, if it even ever concludes. I never imagined I would find myself in such a situation. Even though this is a throwaway account, I fear she will see this post as she can access my tablet at home, and I received an email notification for creating the account. Nevertheless, I am posting this anyway because I genuinely need to express what is on my mind. I am not seeking advice, but I could really use some kind words as I have never felt this lonely in my life. Alternatively, if you think I am utterly despicable, you are welcome to say that as well.